Brian Schaefer pushed the glass door of the bar and stepped inside. The music thumped so hard it shook the floor under his feet. People laughed and shouted over the speakers. Drinks spilled on tables. Glasses clinked. Lights flashed across the room. He was there to relax with his friends after a long week, but no one could have guessed what would happen that night. He was laughing one moment, telling a joke about his college classes. Then he turned to grab his phone from the counter and vanished.
Gone.
Just like that. No one saw him leave. No one heard him go out. The cameras caught him walking into the bar, cheerful, joking, but after that, nothing. Just empty air. People assumed he left the way he came in, but the doors were checked.
Locked.
Secured. No trace. And that was how Brian Schaefer disappeared.
But how?
Where did he go?
Why?
And, most importantly, could someone have taken him? Or had he walked into something far more dangerous than anyone could imagine? It had all started hours before the chaos. Brian had been studying late in his college dorm. He was tired, exhausted even, from a week of exams and deadlines. His friends had invited him to a bar nearby to unwind. At first, he hesitated. He was not usually the party type, preferring quiet nights with a book or a movie. But the promise of laughter, a few drinks, and letting go of stress convinced him. On the way there, Brian joked with his friends about how he might fall asleep on the couch instead of dancing. They all laughed. The streets were lively that night, with lights from shops and bars illuminating the wet pavements from an earlier drizzle. He felt normal. Safe. Like any other Friday night. Inside the bar, Brian's life seemed perfectly ordinary. He ordered a beer, caught up with friends, and even danced a little. He waved at familiar faces across the room. People smiled. Drinks were raised in cheers. But somewhere in the shadows, the normalcy of that night twisted. A figure, just at the corner of the bar, watched him. Brian didn't notice. Maybe he laughed at someone passing by. Maybe he was too focused on the music, the fun, the chatter. But the figure did. And when Brian turned to grab his phone, his last known move, he vanished. The next morning, his friends realized he hadn't gone home. They assumed he slept over at a dorm or with a friend. But by evening, panic set in. Calls went unanswered. Texts ignored. Even his roommate swore he hadn't come back. That's when the horror began to sink in. Brian Schaefer was gone. The police were called. CCTV from the bar was checked. And the cameras revealed the last sighting, him entering the bar, laughing alive. But nothing showed him leaving. Not through the front. Not through the back. Not through any side exit. Brian Schaefer had vanished into thin air. The city was stunned. Friends, family, classmates. Everyone wondered the same terrifying question. Was he taken? Did he leave willingly? Or had something far stranger happened? Even the simplest explanations seemed impossible. Doors locked. Cameras silent after his last step. Witnesses couldn't remember seeing him leave. The night that was supposed to be ordinary had turned into a nightmare. And just as the first investigators were combing through the scene, something happened. Something extreme. Something that would make the disappearance even stranger. A phone call came into the bar's office. The voice on the line was low, almost a whisper. He's not who you think he is, and you'll never find him. Then click. Silence. The hairs on the back of everyone's neck stood up. Was it a prank? A warning? Or a sign that Brian's vanishing was not an accident, but part of something darker, something no one could explain? And that's where it ended, right at the edge of terror. Questions spinning, hearts pounding, and the reality that Brian Schaefer was gone, with no trace, no explanation, and perhaps no way back. The bar manager, a tall man named Rick, held the phone to his ear long after the caller hung up. His hand shook. His face went pale. The police officers inside the bar noticed immediately and rushed toward him. What happened? One officer asked. Rick swallowed hard. Someone just called. They said, he's not who you think he is, and you'll never find him. Then they hung up. The officers froze. The disappearance of Brian Schaefer was already strange. But now, a shadow hung over the room, thick, heavy, frightening. It felt like the beginning of something darker, something no one was ready for. One of the detectives stepped forward. Did the caller sound young? Old? A man? A woman? Rick shook his head. I don't know. The voice was low.
Soft.
Like they were hiding it. The detective scribbled notes. We'll trace the call. But they all knew it wouldn't be easy. Calls like that were usually made from throwaway phones. The kind used by people who didn't want to be found. That was the shocking twist that sent fear through everyone. Now the low followed. Hours passed. The police searched every corner of the bar. Behind shelves. Under counters. In storage closets. In bathrooms. Even a small attic-like space above the ceiling tiles. Nothing. The CCTV was watched over and over. They slowed the footage. They zoomed in. They checked every face in the bar. But the same impossible truth stared back at them. Brian walked in. But he never walked out. Meanwhile, far away from the noise and fear, Brian's father, Randy, sat in his quiet living room. He had no idea what was happening. He thought his son was safe, maybe even sleeping late after a night out with friends. He didn't know the nightmare that was coming. Later that evening, the phone rang. It was Brian's roommate, Derek. Mr. Schaefer. Brian didn't come home last night. We can't reach him. Randy sat up straight. What do you mean he didn't come home? Did you check with his friends? Sir, everyone is looking. He's not anywhere. Randy's heart began to pound. His hands trembled. I'm coming to campus. That was the emotional worry beginning to swallow his father. Hours later, Randy arrived at the campus and rushed to the bar where Brian was last seen. The police were still there. Lights flashed across the street. People whispered in groups. Randy pushed through the crowd. Where is my son? Please someone tell me what's going on. A detective stepped forward. Mr. Schaefer, we're working on it. We're doing everything we can. But right now, we don't know where Brian is. Randy stared at him, confused. What do you mean you don't know? He walked into this bar. He had friends here. He isn't the type to run away. The detective hesitated. Sir, we checked the cameras. He entered, but he never left. Randy's mouth dropped open. That's impossible. We know, the detective said quietly. That's why we're treating this very seriously. The low deepened. The next day was filled with long hours of waiting, cold, slow, painful waiting. Friends were questioned. Workers at the bar were questioned. Even people in the street outside were questioned. Still nothing. Reporters began to gather outside the bar. Microphones. Cameras. Curious eyes. They wanted answers. But no one had any. Inside the police station, the detective leading the case pinned printed photos of Brian on a board. A smiling young man. A college student. A normal guy with a normal life. Nothing about him shouted danger. So then why did someone call the bar saying he wasn't who people thought he was? Was it a clue? A threat? A distraction? Or something worse? The low quietly deepened the mystery.